Good afternoon, everybody, once again, or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Jeremy, and you are attending Understanding and Supporting Adult Children in Transition, a webinar presented by the Cafe TA Center and facilitated by our good friends Kirsten Drybro and Charlotte Armstrong, to whom I will introduce you in just a couple minutes. If you've been with us before in any of our webinars, you know that I like to tell you about who we are and what we do here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If you've heard it all before, my deepest condolences. So what is the Family Cafe and what is the Cafe TA Center? So we are a grassroots cross-disability nonprofit with a national scope. We are located here in Tallahassee, Florida, and we serve people with all types of disabilities, providing information and training on a wide range of topics. The way we address mental health is through our Cafe TA Center. The Cafe TA Center is a SAMHSA-funded consumer or consumer supporter technical assistance center for mental health. So a couple things about that. First of all, sometimes people say, why cafe? Are you a restaurant? No. That's an acronym for collaboration, advocacy, friendship, and empowerment, which are our founding values and the things we try to reflect in everything we do. And then what's a SAMHSA-funded consumer supporter TA center? That might be foreign language to some. So, of course, SAMHSA is the federal agency tasked with dealing with mental health and substance use. And they have all kinds of grant programs doing technical assistance, which basically is their term for teaching people how to do things. What's unique about our technical assistance center is, unlike those that are clinical or academic in focus, or operated by credentialed professionals, if you will, the consumer and consumer supporter TA centers are all about people with lived experience of mental health sharing their expertise with other people in that same situation. It's very much a nothing about us without us approach. We're not clinicians and we're not academics. We're people who have walked the same road that you're walking and believe in things like recovery and the value of peer support and the idea of mutuality. So really, even though I'm here introducing the webinar, we're all on the same rung when it comes to the hierarchy, and we've all had the experiences we're going to be talking about today and are sharing from that perspective. Of course, like every good TA center, we have a fancy website, which you can find online at cafetacenter.net. I encourage you to go there to learn more about all of our programming, both on family mental health and on a range of other topics. That's also where you'll find a whole series on family mental health that Kirsten and Charlotte helped us develop a couple of years ago. That's on the website there. We'll be talking about more about that towards the end. You can join our mailing list there, of course, and perhaps most importantly, that's also where you can go to find a recording of today's webinar. Once we are through with it, you'll find it there right on the homepage in the article about the webinar, and all of the recordings are listed on the TAC Trainings tab of the website. A little bit about myself and who I am. I'm the program director here at Cafe TAC. My name is Jeremy. I'm a person with lived experience, and I'm also a parent of kids that have a couple different disability and mental health situations they're dealing with. So I'm in that boat as well. I have here with me today my friend John Ferrone, who's our training coordinator, joining us from scenic Hastings, Nebraska. John is also a parent of kids with various mental health and behavioral health situations and has mentored a number of youth in that situation. So he comes to us from that context as well. What John and I will be doing after we hand it off to Kirsten and Charlotte is keeping track of all your questions and comments. Of course, since this is a nothing about us without us effort, and I just went on that whole bit about how we're all in this together, one of the ideas of doing these webinars is to make them as sort of interactive and responsive to your needs as possible in this type of format. So we certainly encourage you to share your questions and comments. You can do that in the chat. You can also use the Q&A function there in Zoom, and we can keep track of the questions that way. But however you do it, we definitely encourage your participation and welcome it. So with that, it's going to be my distinct pleasure to introduce Kirsten Drybro and Charlotte Armstrong. and they're going to take us through their presentation, and we're going to have ample opportunity to talk through it and field questions and have discussion once we get through that. So welcome to both of you.
Oh, well, thanks, Jeremy. It's, Kirsten and I always love spending time with you and John and doing these webinars. And I was watching some of the hellos in the chat, and I recognized some people who've come to our other webinars. So welcome, and welcome to all the new people that are joining us today for the first time. My name is Charlotte Armstrong. I'll be facilitating this with my good friend Kirsten as well. And today's webinar is a little different. We've talked about mental health and addiction and supporting, adult children in our previous webinars. And today's, when we talk about transitioning, it may or may not include people who have that lived experience of mental health challenges, but we may see addiction or, depression or anxiety showing up as our adult children are transitioning or thinking about transitioning, whether it's college, university, a trade, thinking of moving out of our house for the first time, all of those things that are coming up for them. And how do we as parents support that? And why me and why Kirsten? Well, I'm a peer support trainer, and I also do a lot of family peer support. I'm a person with lived experience. I have 2 daughters that I like to say are living in wellness. My oldest, who I like to call my tester child, really struggled with her mental health in middle school and high school. And I got the introduction to what it's like to support a child who struggles with their mental health. The experience of supporting her changed my career and changed my path. And I'm absolutely passionate about peer support, especially the family peer support, because we need supports too, as we support someone in our family who's struggling with mental health. Kirsten?
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm really excited to be here as well. I always love doing these webinars, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here today. Like Charlotte, I am also a peer trainer, a peer support trainer, and I'm also a family peer support worker. So what that means is that I certainly have my own lived experience supporting somebody in my family that struggles with mental health and or addictions. And I always like to refer to my youngest daughter, although I do have 2 beautiful children, 2 girls that come with a twist. And my youngest daughter lives today in wellness with a diagnosis of bipolar. And what that means for me to say that she lives today in wellness is she living the life that I had planned, or by the agenda I had set out early on when I was having my family? Not exactly, but is she taking ownership of her own life, her life choices, her mental health and her physical health? Absolutely. So Charlotte and I always like to say, is it perfect? No, but it's really, really good. And looking back in my own family story, first off, everything that we do in the work that Charlotte and I do is through that lens of what would have made a really big difference in our own family mental health story in those really difficult times. Peer support for me, and I know for Charlotte, came later on in our family mental health story. So I'm just thinking today about how transitioning the fall times of going into school, college, these were really, really high anxiety times for me, given the complex challenges that my daughter was experiencing and my family at that time. So as we move forward today, you're going to hear a little bit about our own family story, both Charlotte and I. And I want to make sure I let it know early on that, Charlotte, you and I didn't always get it right. In fact, I'd say I got it wrong a lot more before I learned to do things differently, and things started to change for the better in my own family mental health story. And so you're certainly going to hear a lot of wisdom that we learned through what we did in our own family story and what we know now, but we didn't know back then. Did you want to add anything, Charlotte?
I think we'll go to the next slide, Jeremy.
Okay, so before we begin, we always like to talk about what family peer support is. And if you've been to our webinars before, I know you've got a good idea of what it's all about. But here, the SAMHSA definition explains it's the instrumental, social, and informational support provided from one parent to another in an effort to reduce isolation, shame, and blame, to assist parents in navigating systems. That's a big one, and to provide other relevant life experience. So this is from one parent to another. This is where I also like to just pause and make sure we define family, because what family is to you is what family is to us. So we understand that there's family of choice, that we're going to use words like caregiver, family, loved one, and we're if you're in a role where you're identifying that you are in a parental role, then that's what we're talking about. You're in the right place. Um, Certainly not held to a traditional standard. Did you want to add anything, Charlotte?
I do, and I've chatted with the people at SAMHSA a couple of times in hopes that they'll change this definition just a little bit, because where it says, parent to another, I really want to encourage them to consider that there's other members of a family who are struggling, whether it's parents, grandparents, siblings, best friends. And so for us, in the work that Kristen and I do, family peer support is supporting anybody who shows up, whether it's a parent or not, sibling. And we're always looking for other people to join in and take the training to become a family peer supporter, because the more we have people out there supporting the family, I always feel like we have a shot at the mental health changing in a family.
Hey, and before we move on, I also wanted to touch on the definition of adult child. So when we refer to an adult child, I want to make it really clear that we could be referring to somebody that is 18 years old, or is 38, or quite honestly, 58 years old. So if you have a child is always a child to a parent, regardless of age. So we're absolutely referring to a very, very broad spectrum of age. And I also want to just say, as Charlotte said early on, this webinar is a little bit different to the ones we've done in the past, and a whole lot the same. But chances are, if you're here today because you have a transitioning young adult, whether it's going into a trade, college, leaving the family home, embracing on full-time work, leaving high school, whatever that looks like, moving out for the first time at 32 years old, whatever that looks like, they may or may not also be struggling with a mental health challenge. Quite honestly, if you're here because substance use is a huge issue that you're trying to get your head around in your family, maybe there's diagnoses of anxiety, depression. In my case, my daughter has bipolar disorder. All of this would not surprise me one bit. And I just wanted to touch on that briefly before we move to the next slide.
Next slide, please. The parallel process. We refer to this as, when one person in the family is struggling, it impacts every member of the family. But not only that, each of us brings our own mental health story to the collective family. I like to say that, it's not always about the person who is struggling the most or who got the diagnosis. We like to look at everybody's role in that. And if you had met me 15 years ago and said, how are you doing, Charlotte? How's your mental health? I would have looked at you and said, I'm good. I've got this. This isn't about me. It's about my daughter. But when I look back, I was incredibly anxious. I was bringing a huge amount of anxiety into the family, and I wasn't taking the best care of myself because I was so living in fear. And many of the choices I was making back then were fear-based or based around anxiety. And so when we talk about this, we really want people to start to look at the role that they play in their family's mental health story, and to start thinking about the only person you can change is yourself. And so when we can start looking at things that we can change to support our mental health, we've got a better shot at showing up and supporting the rest of our family. Kirsten?
Yeah, it really is as simple as that. Like the parallel process is recognizing and embracing change, that the family doesn't sit back and look to the one who's struggling within the family unit to do all the heavy lifting and make change within that individual. But when the entire family, whether it's your sibling, a parent, a grandparent, sometimes if you're living under the same roof, of course, but when the entire family can embrace changing what they bring to that family mental health story, well, that's what we call the parallel process. And that's when the magic happens.
So in terms of this webinar today, I want you to start to think about what role are you playing as your child, your adult child, starts to think about that transition or are transitioning. Are there certain things that you're doing to support that? And we'll talk about that as we go along. Jeremy, the next slide, please. So the objectives today, we're going to share some skills and some tools that can support not only yourself, but also your adult child. We're going to talk about those words, resiliency and empathy, and how they show up, in our parenting role. And we're also going to start to think about that word autonomy. And what does that look like for our adult child? And then what does that look like as we take on this role of more of a supporter? Next slide, Jeremy, please.
It starts with you. So if you haven't been to our webinars before, this might be a new concept, but it really is, it's what we preach all the time, Charlotte and I. And change within your family story starts with you and your actions. So a couple of things that I'm really hoping that you'll focus on today in this webinar is looking at, exactly as Charlotte said, how you show up in the family mental health story, and start to consider reshaping that relationship that you have with your adult child, that parent-adult-child relationship, regardless of age. And the second thing I'd like us to start thinking about, there's two definite relationships that we're going to talk about today, and they have a pretty big divide. So the parent of a child or adolescent in your role is to, and I'm talking about a parent of a teenager, a parent of a 9-year-old. Your role is absolutely to show up and manage their needs and supervise their life. This is what we refer to as being a good parent. We sign them up for soccer. We make sure homework's done. We make sure library books are returned. They show up and support their team on days when they really don't even want to show up. We get them out of bed. The list goes on and on and on. But when you think of the parent and young adult relationship, this is where I want you to see a real divide between what you did with a teenager and a child and your role as parenting the young adult and your transitioner. So the best way to describe it for Charlotte and I, we like to use the words, you're now showing up in the role of a supporter or a consultant. So what does that mean? Well, are you an administrator and manager of their life, where you're doing their laundry, filling out their college forms, financially supporting them 100%, regardless of what's going on, making sure their library books are back and you're the human alarm clock? Hopefully you can recognize those two distinct roles are very different, and you can start to see the lanes. I'm a very visual person, so I always like to refer to staying in your lane. And before we move on, there's just one story here that Charlotte and I'm going to share it. And it's about a family we were supporting. And in this family unit, it was a parent and an adult child. And the adult child was a 30-something-year-old. And the thing about this relationship, as we supported this family, this mom, is that early on when we first met her, she was really, really hardcore in that lane of supporting her adult child, the same as she supported her child and adolescent. So what does that mean? She was showing up financially and emotionally to support him on every turn throughout his day. She was still making doctor's appointments, still making phone calls when he wasn't up to it, calling in for sick for work when he wasn't up to it. And what we heard in this relationship over and over again is, well, he behaves like a teenager and he's more like a teenager. And when we started to help that mom look at her role and start realizing that, the idea of him behaving like a teenager and not taking responsibility, ownership, or managing his daily life was because he really never had to. Because this mom, with the absolute best of intentions, was rushing in at every chance to rescue, to fix, save, and solve, as Charlotte and I like to refer to, doing for him and not giving him the space to do for himself. So this relationship had gone on like this for many years. And when we started to work with this mom about reshaping how she showed up and the lane that she stayed in, well, that's when things started to change a little bit. Charlotte, we're going to get way more into this, but did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks. And some of you are out there saying, yes, I hear what you're saying, but you don't understand what's happening in my house. My child is super anxious and I do have to make those doctor's appointments, or I do have to do those things. And my hope is that you'll just take a look and maybe see if there's a way that you could support them to do it, whether you practice role playing of what it's like to make a phone call, instead of just immediately swooping in and fixing, solving, making that appointment. Because ultimately, if we can start to encourage that belief that you've got the power within you, and I'm here just to support you on that journey. What can I do to make it a success for you in making that phone call or filling out that application? And so this is the conversations that Kristen and I, have often with families, is just a subtle change, supporting them to look at the resilience within the child, the adult child, and changing that tendency for all of us, and I'm guilty too, of swooping in and fix, saving, and solving instead of supporting.
And that's our instinct. I also want to say, and Charlotte, you did a great job of making it clear. This is not easy. We understand this is a difficult shift to do. It's a parental instinct to want to protect. This is how we're made. But looking back, and Charlotte, I think you'll agree with me, when I started to reshape my relationship with my daughter when she was about 19 years old, and I started to treat her and change my behavior, so I was behaving in the way of parenting a young adult, it was really uncomfortable for me. And I had to sit in a lot of my discomfort and fight the urge to rush in and fix, because it was killing me that she wasn't doing for herself. And it really did create a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of my own angst. But I'm also here to tell you, if you stay to that role and as you practice it, you will see the magic of the change. And that's when you'll see all your efforts starting to produce results. Your efforts produce results in their behavior. And, I had in the question there, Charlotte, I saw somebody asked, how do you support someone who's a mom who can't see the part they play in that family mental health story? Did you want to take that one, Charlotte?
That's a great question, and we'll talk about it too in the Q&A. And
Okay.
And often what I've found in my role is when I was stubborn and didn't see what my role was, because I truly believed that I was fine and my child was the one that was struggling. And it wasn't until I met some other parents who were going through something similar and they started to share a little bit of their life that I kind of started to get it. And I was willing to hear what they had to say. So there's no hard and fast answer to when a parent is ready to hear that. My hope is that if she ever shows up and wants to hear what she could do differently, if you can talk about it through your own lived experience of what would have been better, it might have someone take a second look. But we can talk about that too in the Q&A.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Charlotte. Maybe we'll move on to the next slide.
So reshaping your role in your relationship, so what does that mean when we're talking about, going from parenting a child or adolescent to supporting a young adult as they transition? And so again, I want you to think about the only person we can change is ourselves. And if we can, and I know I'm reiterating this, but if we can start to see what role we play in our child's life, and what can we change and do differently? So if you are in that lane of fixing, saving, solving, and still managing their life, are there things that you can start to change today or, tomorrow or in the future that really has that message of, I know you've got this, and what can I do to support you in it? So when I think of that, those filling out those college forms or, helping them do their taxes, could you sit beside them as they're filling out the college form? Could you sit beside them as they're filling out the taxes instead of you just going in and doing for them? So again, just subtle things, a little bit of a change with that message of, I know you've got this and I'm here to support you. Kirsten?
Yeah, hey, I'm just watching the chat a little bit while you're talking, and the subject of tough love came up, and it's funny when we think of tough love, sometimes people think it means like loud voices, a pounding of a fist, and like really, really loud. Tough love. I 100% agree with tough love, but think about how that can also show up as you not rushing in to fix, save, or solve, or rescue, and letting that adult child feel the discomfort, the natural consequences, and figure out the skills to move out of that on their own. To me, that is tough love, and that takes skills on the parent, because it's so hard to watch our young adult be in discomfort. So I just wanted to address that because that came up in the chat. I 100% agree with that. And someone else put in the chat, please remember to give grace. This is a hard concept for a lot of 100%.
And I think the thing is when we look at that definition of tough love, how do you define it?
Yes.
And how does that show up for your family? So a tough love could be, creating some boundaries of how you are going to go forward in a relationship. I'm no longer going to pay your DoorDash every time you order, online food until you get a job. I mean, that can be tough love for some people. So again, it's thinking of how you define it. And I always like to think of it as, what boundaries am I going to enforce of things that I have control over?
Oh, Charlotte, we could go way into a rabbit hole here, so I think we better move on. We have more of this coming.
And I will address the letting them, deal with their own consequences. Somebody put in letting them fail, but there are consequences to people's actions, when things aren't done. And again, are we swooping in so that they don't have natural consequences? Because often when they experience something of discomfort, next time around, they may not choose that path. Next slide, Jeremy, please.
So here are a few things to think about. These three questions I find really helpful when you're parenting a transitioning adult. First off, ask yourself, is this my business? So when you're thinking about what's going on with your young adult, really, is it my business? Here's another question to ask yourself, is this his, her, or their business? And I think we're going to start with that one, explaining what this means before we dive into the other two. And when we start thinking about his, her, and their business, again, this is that you're parenting of an adult child. So is their personal and private life and what they do outside of your home, is this truly your business? That's a really, really good question to ask yourself. Or is this his, her, or their business? Um, I'm going to ask Charlotte to touch down on substance use disorder and what showed up. I'm going to challenge you here, Charlotte, when you think about a lot of marijuana use and how that showed up when you were parenting your young adult under your roof.
Oh my goodness, I love when you challenge me on this story. So the mom of me 15 years ago, when talking about, say, smoking pot, it was a hard and fast no, and the reasons for it, and this is when my daughter was a teenager, is like, I just truly believed it was, not the best thing for her. It was, demotivating. It had all of these negative things that I wanted to share with her. Like, I just didn't want her to use it. And it was a hard and fast, not in my house, not in my life. And there was huge consequences when she chose to use it while she was living in our house. Now, when she became an adult, and she would say to me, Mom, I'm finding the benefits of smoking pot are curbing the anxiety that I'm feeling. I'm really finding that it's something that is working for my mental health. Now, my values hadn't changed. I still didn't want it in my house. And so when I'm thinking of this, what Kirsten has put forward in this slide, so her smoking pot outside of the house in her spare free time somewhere else is really her business. She knows my part in that. She knows how I feel about it, and she's made choices for herself. When she brings it into my house, that's when it becomes our business. I really don't want it there. It just goes against everything I believe in. And so I want you to start to think about, are there certain actions? No, I'm reading Debbie's text at the same time. These are some of my values. She's chosen this way. I still have an opinion on what pot is. I mean, I'm not as hard and fast as I was when she was a teenager, but I still have the things that are showing up, nuances in my head. What she does outside of the house is her choice, it's her business. But when it comes in my house, it's still, our house, our business, and we don't want it there. And so the purpose of me sharing this story is to think about, are there things happening in your house that may or may not sit well within your house? And then I go back to that comment about that collaborative problem solving question. Is this something that we can discuss? Because it is our business. It is, my daughter's, my husband's, the other people living in the house, and make a collective decision around that. But what she does outside of the house truly is her business. And it doesn't have I don't have a say in that. Kirsten, did you want to add to that?
I was just thinking, it sounds like you moved off the supervisor management team and moved into the role of a consultant when you're explaining that.
Yeah. And when I gave that example, and speaking of that, at the end of the day, this was a conversation we had in the teenage years, in the early 20s. What's happened in her late 20s is she's taken even more ownership of her mental health and chosen different coping strategies to manage her mental health. And she came to that decision on her own to give it up because she didn't like the side effects anymore. And so if I had been so hard and fast on her, I don't know if I could have heard as she transitioned through the different phases of trying different things to support her mental health. Would she have been able to open up with me? Again, I had that consultant hat on, or that supporter hat, as she shared with what was working for her. Hey, Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. And these questions for me as a tool, as a something I tap into or I did in the past when we were cohabitating together, really, really helped me in just defining which lane I was, I was in when I was communicating with my daughter. And another thing that comes up in a lot of households, is having your partner sleep over. Another thing is that my business is my daughter's sex life and personal life, my business. At 20 some years old, what she does outside the house is really not my business. She knows my values and how I feel about certain things. But if it's under my roof and now it's in my house and it's making me feel uncomfortable, exactly, that becomes our business. And that's when you can have an adult conversation with your adult child about how your boundary is, I'm not okay with this happening in my house. I'm not okay with sleepovers. It makes me feel uncomfortable. You know how I feel about this outside of our house. That's your business. But, and it's actually when you start having those adult conversations with your transitioning young adult, you'd be surprised how they return the communication in a very adult way. You would be surprised, same as if you have those conversations with your 20-something-year-old, the same as you would with your 17-year-old, treating them like an adolescent. The response they're going to give you is very much that of an adolescent response. So really going back to it simply starts with you, how you approach it and identifying your role and reshaping your relationship. You'd be surprised at how it brings the results you're looking for the positive. I think we could go to the next slide, Jeremy.
So I keep talking about this word resilience or resiliency, or believing that your child has the powers within. And so I wanted to put up a couple of definitions for you to think about. And resiliency is that capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties or from a hard situation. And so when I think about that, it's again, are we trying to swoop in, fix, save, and solve, or are we supporting them to figure it out on their own? And there's different ways we can approach this. Like if there's a whole list of places where your adult child is stuck, they can't seem to get a job, or they can't seem to fill out an application to go to university, or they can't seem to get a passport, whatever those stuckness looks like. Do you have the fixer, saver, solver hat? Or are you tapping into what can I do to support you? So again, it's not that tough love. I'm not going to help you. But is there something that I can do as a supporter or that consultant role to support your adult child to have some successes, whatever that looks like? And my hope is that you'll take a look at it. I have one of my daughters is living with me this summer, and she's at this crossroads after university and wanting to try living in a different city. And I see that she's a little bit stuck in that next step. And so we've had conversations of, what does this look like for you? What can I do to support you on it? And as opposed to me just jumping in and saying, which I want to, please don't move away from home because I really like having you here. But, when you start to think about your future and looking at this city, what does that look like? And she's now thinking about, testing the market and going and staying for, a few weeks or a month to see if that city is the right fit for her. Again, it's on her time, it's her decision. And I had to sit and not put in my discomfort and not try to swoop in and fix her. The empathy definition, that ability to emotionally understand what somebody may feel, or the ability to see from their point of view and imagine yourself in that place. So when you're thinking of your child in that stuckness, again, how are you showing up? Because sometimes we can just let me just fix this for you, as opposed to supporting them. It sounds like you're really stuck right now, and you're really trying to figure out which way to go. Is there something that I can do to support you to figure out what your next plan is? So again, empathy attached with that resiliency is one of the things that I think about as I support my adult children in their crossroads, in their transitions. Hey, Kristen?
Oh, Charlotte, I'm going to put you in the hot seat again because I want to ask you a couple of questions. So with resiliency, how does and fostering resiliency, can you make the connection with how the word should no longer came up in your vocabulary? Because this is a really good tip. It's a tool.
You know that the word should, are you shoulding on your child? You should do this. You need to go to graduate school. You really should finish that degree. You really should get that part-time job as you're working off your student loans. And, all of you out there saying, what do you mean? Like, how often are we using that word should on our children and on ourselves? Oh, I should have shown up and just filled out that application for them. Oh, I should have just not had witnessed the crying and just picked up their laundry or did their dry clean, whatever it looks like. That word should shows up so often. And my hope is that you'll take a look at it, how you use it on yourself and how you use it on your child, adult child. Hey, Kristen.
I'm going to ask you another question. And somebody just put in the chat, I love that. Should is not a supportive word. So when you're thinking, yeah, it's definitely a word of judgment. And it's a word that creates disconnection, not connection. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But before we do, empathy, empathy, that power of being able to connect with someone, understand their perspective. So when you think of being the parent of an adult child, being able to put yourself in their shoes and understand how they would feel that way, and then communicating that, you could see why they would make that choice, given that these feelings would be coming up for them. One of the things that's super powerful, Charlotte, as you know, is thinking of that time in your life where Charlotte used the words she was at a crossroads with one of her daughters, and still, quite frankly, is. She's her daughter's looking to leave the city they live in and move across the country, and to make that connection about, I remember when I was in a situation and I had these thoughts and I wasn't sure whether to take a right or a left, like your daughter is, and being able to use your experience, whether it doesn't have to be identical, but it has to be, have some level of comparison of having these feelings. Now that can really show up as building connection, having your adult child open up to you. Charlotte, did you want to add on that? I kind of answered it for you, although I said I was going to ask you that question.
And again, I encourage you that if you're hearing us discuss this word should, and you're saying, but in my family, it's different, and I still need to do these things, I should still be that manager of their time or manager of their life. My hope is that you'll unpack it and really spend some time questioning why you think you still need to stay in that manager lane as opposed to that supporter and consultant lane of where, I guess my hope is that you'll take a look at that as you're supporting your adult child.
So before we go to the next slide, also in creating connection and using with empathy, you're tapping into connecting through empathy, validation, which we haven't really talked about today, but if you can couple validation with empathy, like we were just saying, a conversation that looks like something like, I can see this is really upsetting for you. I can sense the energy in your body and the weight on your shoulder. This looks like it's really hard. And if you can't connect through an experience, be honest. I don't know what that looks like. I've never been in that situation, but wow, from here, it looks like a lot. How are you doing? So that's, again, empathy, validation, which leads to a really strong connection, which is how we segue into the next slide, Jeremy.
And Debbie, just reading your comments, and we will get to it for sure, like all the other questions in the Q&A at the end. And And one of the things I really want to talk about is that connection piece. And so when I was reading what Debbie wrote about, their adult child is just not participating in society, connection is such an important and powerful part of the relationship that we have with our children. And so again, when you're talking about that tough love, how does connection play into it? So what am I asking of you? If we can still stay connected with our adult children, thinking about that word resiliency, thinking about empathy, but really managing our relationship and staying connected. That's one of the powerful parts of this webinar that we're talking about. And how I had to sit in my discomfort when my daughters were, maybe making choices that I didn't agree with. Maybe they were, on a career path that I didn't agree with. How do I still stay connected and supportive when I could see that maybe this wasn't the best choice for them? Again, watching how that word should shows up. Do you really think that this is the career choice for you? I thought you were going to go to graduate school. Do you really think that staying in the basement and video gaming all day is the right path for you, or you really should get a job? So when I talk about the video games, it's like, hey, what is it about video games that has you so passionate? I'd love to hear the story behind it. Really starting to understand what is it that they, they're stuck with not coming out of their house, connecting with them. And I found for me, in my family story, the times that my child, or both of my girls, wanted to connect with me was always the worst time for me. So I don't know if any of you are the same, but it was always about right around when I was dead tired, ready to go to sleep, and they would want to talk. It was when I was rushing out the door or, wanting to do some chores around the house is when they wanted to talk. And I really had to start to take a look at how can I support them and hear what they have to say to me. Now, I get if you've got to go to work, but you can say, I really want to continue this conversation when I get home. Is it okay if we have it at 5 o'clock when I get home? And remember it when you walk in the house and say, hey, listen, can we pick up where we left off? If it happens at 11 o'clock at night, can you stay up an extra half an hour and really hear what they have to say? Because supporting them through connection, through resiliency and empathy is one of the things that we have seen the most successes with the families we've supported over the years. Hey, Kirsten?
Yeah, and you know what, Charlotte, I have to be honest with both your family mental health story and mine. I'm not sure how we pulled it off, but we were able to stay connected during those really difficult times. And it's not easy. Like when you're wanting to stay connected and share space and have conversation that is a little on a lighter note, and your young adult is disrespecting your home, behaving badly, struggling with substance, whether it's alcohol, whatever it is, sleeping all day, staying up all night, and to actually be able to stay connected on a different level so they don't feel deep shame, deep blame, and that, they feel that on their own already, trust me. But to actually just share space, whether it's watching a movie, sharing a meal, back and forth light conversation, whatever it is, to actually stay connected and have them leaning into you on some level. That's a powerful thing to stay connected during those times. And, it makes me think of a story I read not all that long ago that I want to share briefly, because it really pertains to exactly what we're talking about today. So there's this mom that was supporting her daughter who is now pushing 30, and she had struggled with a decade of very serious addictions. She had lived in the family home, outside of the family home. This mom did everything that she felt she possibly could do with the best of intentions. Again, a lot of, as she self-declares, a lot of rescuing, a lot of funds spent on treatment facilities, a lot of false starts that went nowhere and cost a lot of money, to the point that her own financial situation and emotional health was really, really fractured, the mom. So the mom had an epiphany one day and connected with the daughter who was, again, trying to manage her addiction, but not moving past her addiction, and declared that she had made a decision that she was going to continue to support her daughter, but she was no longer going to take phone calls. She was no longer going to financially support her, but she was going to support her with the boundaries she set up, which was, I want to have a standing breakfast date every morning on Sunday at 10 a.m. at this restaurant. I will be there. And I'm hoping we can share some time together. And this is really important to me. And this is the boundary, basically, that, without saying that, that I'm putting up for our relationship now. So during that time, that mom met with this almost 30-something-year-old, and they had conversations that was outside the addiction. They had conversations that didn't include the word should. And what happened a year and a half later, that this young woman put herself into a treatment facility and started to make choices that were taking ownership of her health, both physical and mental. And she was working on recovery and moving away from her addiction on her terms. And yeah, I just wanted to share that story because I can't imagine. I talked about sitting in discomfort for that parent when she would sit and not ask about the addiction or the financial situation or what was going on, but to actually really, really stay in that lane as a consultant when tapped into in that adult parenting lane. It's a great story. Yeah.
You know what? And just thinking about, is there something that you're hard and fast on that your boundary? So in that case, the mom was like, I'm no longer going to swoop in and fix, save, and solve you, but I'm going to support you and meet with you every Sunday. So those were some boundaries that she created to support not only herself, but also her daughter. And again, it's starting to look at, are there things that we want to take a look at? Are there some boundaries that we want to consider to support ourselves as we support our young adult who's transitioning? I'll go to the next slide, Jeremy.
All right, again, these are tools. We promised tools within this webinar. So these are some tools for you to consider. They may or may not work with you, but here's things. We're going to start with the first one. Are there subtle ways you may be contributing to your struggling adult child's behavior? Well, looking back in time, 100%. I could probably write a whole chapter on all the ways, subtly and not so subtle, that I was contributing to my daughter struggling with transitioning out of adolescence. And anyways, and whoops, jumped ahead a wee bit. There we go. Second question. Are you willing to reshape your relationship? That's a big one. I think most of you will probably say yes. Are you willing to move into the supporting role or that of a consultant and get off the supervisory management team? You know, you're a consultant. And ask yourself, is this my business, their business, or our business? Great question. And when you're at that crossroads of how you're going to handle a situation, as the parent of an adult transitioning child, there you go. Jeremy?
Next slide, Jeremy. So again, some other things for you to think about. I'm going to say that again, reshaping your boundaries. Like, what do those look like? Have you considered what your actions that are showing up so that it's not fostering that resiliency? It's not fostering that natural consequences, whatever it might be. You know, are you paying every time they get a speeding ticket? Is it just habit? Here's my credit card, away you go. Are you paying for all those university courses and watching them, you know, drop out and not fulfill? Are there things that you can reshape your approach to supporting your adult child? You know, are you fostering resiliency or creating dependency? Because again, if it's always easier, you know, if I just do it, you know, there's no natural consequences, but they're never learning that independence, that those skills that they need to support themselves in that adult world. The validation piece, the empathy, asking curious questions. and validating, I know I'm hearing it's really struggling. You're really struggling. I'm hearing that it's really hard for you. Instead of swooping in and fixing, what can I do to support you? Thinking about that. So again, that hard line, tough love, or is there a way that we can support them to learn the skill so that they can move on and be successful, whatever that looks like? And that superpower of connection, again, how can we stay connected, sit in our discomfort, stop using that word should, but really hearing what they want or need or where their fears are. Again, just something to think about as you're supporting not only yourself, but your adult child. Take the next slide, Jeremy, please.
All right, so we're going to chat briefly about the autonomy of your adult child. I mean, isn't that what it's all about? We want our children to get to a place where they have the capacity to self-determine and self-govern. If we stay in that role as parenting a child adolescent, and we're now a supervisor, manager, why are we so surprised if they're not moving into their role of autonomy? So there's that parallel process we talked about a little bit in the beginning. So again, rethinking of reshaping your role as a parent with your adult child is going to get the results of them moving into a place of an autonomy, which is what we're looking for. Next slide, Jeremy.
I think it's your turn, Jeremy, to take over.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to have time for some questions, talk through some more of these issues. So stay tuned for that. But before, I want to just mention a couple things quickly. First of all, Kirsten and Charlotte put together a really cool supports for families series of training modules that are available on our website. So if you go to cafetascenter.net/supports for families workshop series, you can also get to it just by going to our website and going to that TAC trainings page. You'll be able to access that. This is a really cool piece of training material we've created here because it has a whole workbook that allows you to go through it at whatever pace you choose and to do the parts that are most relevant to your situation, depending on what's going on in your world. And they're all accompanied by short videos that explain what's happening in each module and help you work through it. So if you're experiencing some challenges working with a young person in your family, or anybody that you're supporting in your family for that matter, or anybody that you're supporting in your personal network, whether it's, quote unquote family or not, this is a great resource to help you navigate that. So please do take advantage of it and check that out. Again, if you just go to our website, cafetascenter.net, and go to that TAC trainings page, you can't miss it. It's right there at the top. You'll see the same images you see here on this slide. The other thing I wanted to mention, and John and I, you might have seen us saying something about this in the chat there. One of the things we're doing in this series with Kirsten and Charlotte that's going on throughout our current grant year is we've set aside some of our resources to allow them to work with people individually. So if you have, some unique situation in your family dynamic or with somebody you're supporting, a specific question you want to ask about, maybe you look at that training module I was just referring to on the previous slide, have a question about some aspect of that. You want to talk through anything you have going on an individual basis, you can definitely reach out to either Kirsten or Charlotte directly. You can see their email addresses right there on the slide. You can also, reach out to me, and I will be happy to connect you with both of them. And I know it's a pain because you can't click on the slide to get to the email during the Zoom. But the good news is once the recording's up, you'll be able to go into the recording and find it that way. And again, if you just contact our TA center using the email address there on our website, I'll be able to hook you up that way too. But this is a really good way to get some family peer support that can be specific to exactly what you have going on in your world. So I certainly encourage you to take advantage of that. So right now, we have at least a solid half hour left. So I know I had a couple questions and things that came up for me during the presentation, and I'm sure everybody else on the Zoom attending had things going through their minds too. So I guess what I will do now is just pick some things at random. So one thing that's in the Q&A here, this is a question from Lisa. She's saying, can you elaborate on embracing setbacks as stepping stones? What does that mean to you, and how does one do it?
Who
Did
could
you want?
go?
I can grab that one.
Okay,
Uh,
talk about our t-shirt first too, Kristen.
well, when Charlotte and I do training, we do have matching t-shirts that says "Bumpy is good," because somehow some of us have this idea that recovery or moving into a better place is just a nice swooping little line of improvement, and you get to a destination and everything's going to be awesome. Well, things may not be perfect. Things can go off track fast and hard. If you start looking at when things get off track as that is opportunity to build resiliency, opportunity for growth, for skills, right? When you think of it, one of the concepts, and I hope I'm getting to this for you, but one of the concepts I did not realize early on in my parenting years, especially parenting, in my daughter's story, anorexia was something that came up as one of her coping strategies for undiagnosed bipolar and extreme mood swings. So I wanted to just swoop in and fix and save and rescue all the time when anything got hard for her. Well, by doing that, I was taking her away her opportunity to build resilience. And I didn't get that by me sitting in my discomfort, because it's my parent instinct to rush in and make things easier for her, I was actually contributing to her not being able to build the skills of resiliency and skills she could tap in when this situation happened again. Because what I was fostering was when that situation happened again, she looked to me to solve it again, because that's what I did last time. I hope I'm answering that. Charlotte, did I answer that okay?
Yeah, and oh, sorry about that. I think that I was reading some of the chats as we went through it. There's the natural consequences, and then there's the safety or the financial safety aspect that we always have to consider as well. But again, it's just checking in of, why do I want to swoop in and not allow this setback, or what is it that has me feeling like I need to make sure everything is okay? Because I will tell you that some of the worst times for me, questionable times in my daughter's life, built her resilience up, and she started to make choices that were different and better suited for her. And I often think that had I swooped in and rescued, things may not have been, things could have been different. I'll give a quick example. She was living out on the West Coast. I live in the central part of North America, and she had broken up with her boyfriend, or he had broken up with her, and she was so upset. And all I wanted to do was run out, pick her up, and bring her home and keep her close to me. And I didn't end up running out there, but I wanted to send her younger sister to go and bring her home. And her younger sister got COVID, couldn't travel. She ended up staying out on the West Coast, and she worked on herself. And while she was working on herself, we were staying very connected. I spoke to her all the time. And as she was working on herself, her former boyfriend was working on himself. And through that, they found each other again. And they got married last December. And I think often if I had gone in and just brought her home and made it all better, would she have worked on herself as much as she did? And would they have found each other again? So something to think about. Next question, Jeremy.
This is an interesting one, and it came up earlier, and then it came up a second time just when I said, "Hey, give us some questions." So, just big picture. This is sort of paraphrasing. There were a couple people who mentioned that the child they're supporting has some type of developmental disability. In one case, it was autism. So, when you're thinking about moving from the supervisor to the supporter role, as we kind of talked about at the beginning, and what that looks like. How does that look when you are dealing with a child that has a developmental disability? Like, do you try to follow the same sort of rules about giving them more room to sort of room to fail, if you will, and have the experience of learning from failing and sort of taking that approach of I'm here to support you, but I'm not going to do everything for you? Or, I think that speaking for myself as a parent of a kid with a developmental disability, that can be harder to do, I think, than if your kid is typically able, all even with some kind of mental health condition. And I think one of the comments was sort of that it was possible to give the child enough slack to start figuring things out on their own and to try to transition into that supporter role, and then there'd be some kind of situation would arise where you would feel like they were not safe in a given moment because of some interaction or something that was happening in their life, or that they might be getting overwhelmed. And I think for parents of children with developmental disabilities, it can be a little bit harder to move over into that supporter role because, just as, all parents and caregivers of small children, when they're toddlers and in kindergarten, what have you, you're used to doing everything for them. And parents of kids with developmental disabilities, I think, are especially aware of not their limitations necessarily, but kind of the way they might be treated once they're out in the world and are sort of protective on some level. So I'm curious if you've had experience dealing with families where they had, adult children that had maybe autism or other developmental disabilities, as well as some mental health type of challenge. And are the challenges in being a good supporter in that context different? Are they more difficult? And is there different guidance in terms of how to approach them?
I'll start with this one, Kirsten. And I can only share from my experiences, and so hear me out, and then I'm going to pass it to Kirsten. So my day job is I train peer support workers to work in healthcare settings, whether they have mental health challenges, addiction, whatever that looks like. And my biases are always being challenged. So I have trained over the years a number of people who, have autism, or they call themselves autistic. And the reason I'm sharing that is because when I hear them share parts of their stories, here they are employed, working in the field, supporting other people with autism. And 9 times out of 10, they start their story of nobody believed that I could ever have this job. So the reason I share that is, are your biases, are your judgments that your child can't do for themselves showing up in all aspects of their life, in some aspects of their life? And again, each one of you has your own story, and your child has their own story too. But I'm encouraging you to think about, are you giving them a chance to try things that may not fit in what you believe that they can? And again, I'm hearing that part of that safety issue as well. And there's those curious conversations you can have with your child to support them seeing things a little bit differently. but I will share with you that I truly have seen some phenomenal people working in the field of mental health who have that diagnosis. Kirsten?
Yeah, we do see that quite often, don't in our work, Charlotte. And I'm just going to refer to a couple things briefly, and then we'll move on. But throughout this webinar and all the work that we do, Charlotte and I certainly understand that there's quite a vast amount of everybody's story is unique and different, and we often use the word "this is something" or the tagline "this is something to look at." This may or may not work for you. I think in your own gut as a parent, I think if you, as Charlotte just touched on, can really look at your biases, whether they're conscious or not, like really dig deep. We hear that all the time, Charlotte and I. Nobody thought I could do this. Going back in time, in my own family story, my daughter left high school in grade 9, and we got her through high school homeschooling. And she rarely left the house for many years, and she had very extreme anxiety, depression, and some bizarre behaviors that were concerning, and anorexia, which was a huge challenge. So during those times, we bought a home that had 3 floors, and the 3rd floor was almost like a suite. And we bought this home because she was going to live with us forever. And my daughter moved out on her own at 22 years old. I always say she lives in wellness today with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And she struggles from time to time with disordered eating, but for the most part, she knows what she needs. And right now, she just purchased a visa to go work in Australia for a year. So, talk about challenging my biases. And I'm not trying to make the parallel to anyone who has more challenging disabilities, a young person. But yeah. I just wanted to share that bit. And I love what Debbie put in the chat. You lead to their ability. Let them do as much as they can, but be there for them. I love that. Thank you for putting that up.
That kind of leads me to another question that I had, and I think it's kind of woven in a lot of what the conversation's been about here. Going back to that slide, there was kind of a summary slide, these 4 things. And one of them was about whether or not you're doing something counterproductive. How do you know whether you're doing something counterproductive or not? Like, I know, it's kind of one of those problems where you're not necessarily aware of what you're doing when you're doing it, and you might not have some kind of objective third party to say, hey, you need to back off because you're not giving this person you're supporting enough space to be autonomous and figure their stuff out. Because I often find myself wrestling with that very question, should I help? Should I not help? Should I say something, or should I say, this is something you need to figure out on your own because you need to grow and be, autonomous adult? What's the way you advise people to deal with how to figure out whether or not they're doing something productive? Because somebody could easily think, oh, this is what I should be doing, and this is great. And, somebody else might come along and say, okay, that's probably not the best approach because you're doing the fixing, solving, rescuing type routine that people fall into. How do you help people get to that level of self-awareness about making those decisions?
Did you want me to start, Charlotte? Okay. Great question, Jeremy. And there is really no absolute magic, simple answer to that. But with families, when we're first meeting them where they're at, and they're typically the parents pretty worn down. Charlotte and I can clearly see that their own well-being and wellness is being deteriorated, even if they may not see that at the time. So the first thing we do is we really ask parents how they're doing, and dig a little deeper with that. And what, if they say fine, we may ask, so what does fine look like to you? The second thing is, as a parent, ask yourself when you're supporting your young adult or transitioner, am I doing something that they should be or can be doing for themselves? Just pause and think about that. Um, although there might be a timeline on it, or it might make you uncomfortable, am I rescuing right now? Am I doing something for them that they really have the ability, should learn the skills, or can already do for themselves? I'm just going to ask Charlotte to weigh in as well.
And just thinking of exploring what has it that you're questioning how you want to support your child. Are some of your own lived experiences from your past playing in your head that you don't want them to experience that? It's really, and I always think that if you're questioning, why are you questioning? Like, so really thinking about what does that look like? And it can be like managing your own anxiety. So my oldest is in Europe right now. Did I watch the movie Taken last week before she flew? Yep. Could I have turned that movie off? I sure could have.
Why did you do that to yourself?
I know. I don't know why I did it, but I did. So I'm living in the angst of watching that show as she got on a plane. And so I'm like, dumb, like for me. And I'm joking with that, but I also, the reason I share with that is we bring our own angst to the family. We bring our own history. We don't bring our own, what happened in our childhood. We bring all of this with us into our family. And is some of the choices we're making parenting a product of stuff that we need to look on for ourselves? So like I said, it's just really, if something inside of you saying this doesn't feel right, is there a support group that you can go to? Is there one-on-one peer support? Is there someone you can talk to that has had a similar life experience that could be that of a, bounce ideas off of? And if you're going to your family and friends and they're not giving you the right answers, explore something a little differently to look for that support that fits for you.
And I'm just going to add on that. If you are getting unsolicited advice from family members or concerned friends, ask yourself if they have had the same situation, or if they've ever parented through where you're at. Because if they hadn't, you may not want to take that advice to heart, and you may want to seek out family peer support and connect with a community or an individual who actually can relate and has been in your shoes.
Let me ask another question. I think is kind of in the same ballpark, and this is from way at the beginning when you're talking about, the difference between being a supervisor and being a supporter. I think on the one hand, it's easy to grasp that concept and it makes sense. My question is this: are there sort of stages in between those two things? I'm obviously, you don't go from saying, I'm going to do everything from tying your shoes and brushing your teeth to, doing your homework for you on the one end to like go move out of my house and get a job on the other end. Like there's a lot of space in between those two things, right? So I guess my question is two parts. Do you find that there are a lot of stages or gradations between those two extremes in the families that you've worked with? And do you find that it's usually a kind of linear process, or do you think it's normal for people to like go forwards and backwards and like have successes and then have some failures and kind of get there in a circuitous way?
Oh, I'll start and you can add, Charlotte. I like to call it a practice, because it's not that long ago, and I'm sure it will happen again, where Charlotte will point out, as I'm leaning into Charlotte for support as a parent during some concerning times, where she will have me check in what lane I want to be in, and kind of do a self check-in. So You know, there's no, Jeremy, that in my experience and the families we work with, it's a practice. The more you practice it, the more natural it comes, the easier it is to stay in a lane. Do you get it perfect and 100% right all the time? I don't think anybody does. But Charlotte, did you want to add on that?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things we support families is each family is individual. Each way they want to support show up as a support is individual as well. And so our job is to support you as you explore what you want to change. And it may start off with, a few things that, you can do a little differently. And then we celebrate those little changes as, I remember one mom was like, I actually went to a movie and turned my phone off, and it wasn't on the phone, ready to answer any calls. And that was a big deal for her. This was the first time she had been off the air, watched a movie, and had no interruptions. And so those steps look differently for everyone. And the beauty of what peer support does is we support you as you figure out what the proper path for you looks like.
Well said, Charlotte.
I'm not sure if I missed any questions in the chat, so I'm going to go back and comb through there after I ask this one, which is another one I thought of. It seems like a lot of what we're talking about here, it's always difficult to, really make strong distinctions between this is this thing and this is that thing, because everything in human experience gets interwoven in a way where it's difficult to tease things out. That said, some of this experience, I think, is universal. Everybody goes through the transition process from child to adult, or from, being inside of one household to going out and being independent at whatever age that happens for them. And so some of what we're talking about applies to everyone in the world around that kind of stuff. But then we're also talking about people's experience of their mental health and trying to support the wellness of somebody that has a distinct mental health condition they're dealing with. So when you're thinking about this whole topic, right, and you're thinking about, oh, am I being a supporter today, or am I being a supervisor today? Am I being the consultant, or am I being, the overbearing boss? Does that change when you're thinking about, okay, this is just like a life thing versus this is something that's central to somebody's mental health condition? Like, I'm thinking specifically about, is it harder or different to help somebody transition to autonomy when the thing that they're having trouble with is directly related to their mental health? Like, maybe it's about they're disengaging from treatment, or they're, disengaging from whatever the supports they had that were helping them stay well as they're going through this transition process, or their substance use habits are changing. Is it so I know that's a little amorphous, but I guess what I'm driving at is, do you find that people think differently about this type of thing when the issue is sort of more central to what the behavioral health condition is versus just some kind of general life circumstance? And is there a way to, help people navigate that, where they might say, oh, I'm okay with this person, moving out and getting a job. Yeah, they should do that, but I don't want them making their own decisions about whether or not they're engaging with treatment, or, going to therapy, or whatever you think they should be doing in that regard.
This is a great question, Jeremy, and it's a big question. And if I don't answer it as correct as I can, we talk a lot about this in some of the groups that Kristen and I facilitate for families. And because we unpack this often, you know, is this a mental health or is this a life? And so when I told that story of my daughter's, you know, now husband who broke up with her, that was a life question. That was a life example. That was a life, like, it was a breakup. It had nothing to do with her mental health and everything to do with her mental health. So it did. So my head immediately went, she's going to be so upset. Her depression is going to take over and she's going to want off this planet. Because that was me sitting in my anxiety of what had happened through her teenage years when she didn't want to be here on this planet anymore. And when I asked her what she needed from me and started to support her, so she needed connection and she needed me to be a supporter for her as she worked through what that looked like. So again, I wanted to swoop in and save her and not allow the consequences of a breakup to happen. So what happened for her is she built resiliency. She worked on herself, and I'm repeating myself, but I work with a lot of amazing individuals who have significant mental health diagnosis, and they live a great life. You know, my business partner is one, you know, for an example. She has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. I'm allowed to share bits of her life. She travels all over the world training peer support workers. And she was told in her 20s that the best job she could ever do would be like a dishwasher. She's figured out how to manage her mental health and she works on it daily. You know, it's part of who she is. Does she have ups and downs? Yeah, she's got really low days where she can't work. And then her super high days, she works like 4 people. And I've been working with her for a long time. And we've figured out, you know, how I can support her and how she can support me. So again, it's challenging our biases of thinking our children can't do. Now, I get there's huge amounts of anxiety out in the world with young adults now. And if we don't support them to learn how to support themselves when life gets hard, they are going to live in our house for the rest of their lives. So it's again, looking at what we can do instead of swooping in to fix, solve, and save, but to support them to figure out what's best for them. Kirsten?
Yeah, and I'll make this brief because I know we're tight on time. You know, when that, and Jeremy, to answer your question, when there's a significant mental health challenge, absolutely, it gets very tricky as far as parenting a transitioner and supporting a young adult. It can show up in various ways. It can show up in us having biases that they can't do for themselves, so therefore we do for them. And it can also show up in ways like it did in my family story, where a lot of bad behavior I put under the umbrella of the mental health diagnoses. So I wasn't, I would have parented a little differently back then, a lot differently back then, knowing what I know today. But so that's one of the things that's a common thing we see. We let our young adults and transitioners, we contribute to their lack of moving forward because we put their inability to move forward or their inability to manage themselves and their bad behavior under that umbrella of, well, they have this mental health diagnosis, therefore it's harder for them, or we need to give them a break on this. So that's all I wanted to add. So once I started sifting through that and getting my own biases in check and reshaping my relationship with her, that's when things started to change for the family for the better.
Wonderful. Well, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I think we've covered pretty much all of the questions. So let me give you a quick tease. I mentioned we're doing a series of these throughout our grant year. So we did one back in May, and here we are in August. All of a sudden, whoops, what happened? We'll be back with the next installment in November, and then we're going to be doing another one in February. So I know there are a lot of people in the audience who keep coming back because they really value this type of support around their family dynamic and learning new ways to think about how they can support independence and self-direction and be helpful and be a resource to the people that they're supporting around them without being overbearing and overstepping and taking autonomy away from people. Because I think what we want at the end is we want people to be able to be them full selves in the world, and the better we can do in terms of helping them get the things that they need to get there on their terms, the better the outcomes will be. So I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation in November. A couple of things, and again, here are these email addresses if you missed them last time. So again, Kirsten and Charlotte are both available to speak with people individually. You see their email addresses up there. Maybe if John is really fast, he can type them into the chat, which you probably also can't cut and paste out of. So maybe it's not worth the effort. I don't know. But again, feel free to reach out to me at cafetascenter.net, cafetascenter@gmail.com is the email address to get to us, and I can hook you up with Kirsten or Charlotte if you didn't get a chance to get their email address. And of course, everybody asks about the recording. Where is it? When is it? I'm going to turn around and try to get that posted as soon as I can once we're done here. If you go to our website, it'll be both linked in the item about this webinar, and then on the TAC trainings page, there's a list of all of the trainings with links to the recordings. So please do go check that out. So again, thank you, Kirsten and Charlotte. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us, Jeremy. Nice seeing you, John.
Thank you.
And see you all in November.
Yes, exactly. And thanks as always, John, for helping me manage things here and make the sausage that we make here at Cafe TAC.
Until November, tough love, everyone.
Yes. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Stay well.